Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this important discussion on liberal approaches to climate change, a way forward for Pakistan. We will be starting shortly. We just want to give it another minute or two as more attendees join, and then we'll get started. Before we begin, I would like to mention that throughout the session, you can use the chat feature to ask questions or share your thoughts. And then we will also have a dedicated question and answer session towards the end of the webinar. So if you think something sparks your interest during the talks, please be sure to note it down. And we are very excited to hear your thoughts as well. Thank you for being here. We will be starting shortly. We are very excited that we have a great lineup of speakers today, and we are looking forward to a very thought-provoking discussion on how liberal principles can contribute to climate solutions here in Pakistan and beyond. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome everyone. So, good afternoon, and let's formally begin our webinar. Welcome everybody to this very important discussion on liberal approaches to climate change and a way forward for Pakistan. As we navigate one of the most pressing global challenges, climate change, it's clear that its impacts stretch far beyond the environment. From emergency security, from energy security to global cooperation, climate change actually affects every aspect of our lives. Yet when we look at the global stage, a very crucial voice seems to be missing, the liberal perspective. With figures like Greta Thunberg and movements like Extinction Rebellion at the forefront of climate action, we have to ask, where are the liberals in this discussion? Have they run out of ideas, or did they simply miss the boat on green issues? So this conversation is particularly very significant for Pakistan. Our nation faces its own unique climate challenges, from rising temperature and glacier melt to frequent flooding. While much of the focus has been on environmental activism and governmental responses, today we want to explore how liberal values like individual freedom, market-based solutions, and personal responsibility can provide innovative approaches to tackling climate change in Pakistan. So let's dive into today's discussion and see how liberalism can play a vital role in shaping a sustainable future for Pakistan. First of all, I want to introduce my first speaker, Sven Gerst. Sven, it's great to have you with us. Sven Gerst is a distinguished philosopher and political economist with a rich interdisciplinary background into philosophy, politics, and economics. He holds advanced degree from King's College London, the London School of Economics and Political Science, and the University of Mannheim, and has also studied and worked at prestigious institutions such as Harvard University, Duke University, St. Petersburg State University, and National Taiwan University. Sven specializes in green liberalism and its application to critical global issues, including climate change, environmental protection, and sustainability. His work uniquely merges philosophical depth with the practical relevance, bridging the gap between academic theory and public policy. His expertise extends to contemporary debates in liberal philosophy and its role in addressing pressing environmental and geopolitical challenges. As the former Secretary General of the International Federation of Liberal Youth, Sven collaborated with over 50 political parties, NGOs, and think tanks worldwide, focusing on public policy, strategic communication, and capacity building. So, Sven, given your deep expertise in green liberalism and your extensive work on climate policy, we are very eager to hear your thoughts on how these principles can address the challenges we are facing today. So, floor is yours. We are looking forward to your valuable insights. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Simon, for the very kind introduction, I must say. So let's get going. I prepared some little slides so I can walk you through that. I will take, and that's kind of a disclaimer, I will take a little bit of a more conceptual approach just to have the framework on the basis which we can later on discuss all of these matters. So I don't go into detail. I haven't been to Pakistan myself, so I rather keep it on the conceptual level, how liberals tend to think about climate change. And kind of to start that conversation, I take a look at the global discussion right now, or discourse around climate change. And what I have been noting is that the world is in turmoil right now. So we all know the wars that are going on in the world. We see that many societies are suffering from inflation and other problems in terms of economies. We see that migration is, for many of the countries, a big concern, especially where I live in the European Union. That is one of the major talking points. And that has meant, sorry that the slide is in German, but it's only available there, that you can see that in the past, climate change was one of the leading topics in my region of the world, and I think in many parts of the Western Hemisphere, in fact, that climate change has been on top amongst all of those crises. But as soon as they exacerbated and accelerated, we see that climate change is slowly dropping. So here you see on the fourth level, that's Klima- und Umweltschutz, that's the German description for climate change, is massively dropping in relevance for voters in the world. And that means that as all of those problems that I just mentioned are coming to the forefront, climate change slowly gets to the back burner of our discussions. And that's something that many of us will feel, because on a global level, we talk a lot about geopolitics, conflict, migration, but climate change, even though we have the frameworks such as the SDGs and the UNFCCC, is slowly on the back burner. And that means that we have to convince voters globally that this topic really matters. I understand in Pakistan, climate change is one of the leading topics, I guess, on the forefront of the awareness. But if we look at a global level, again, climate change has taken a little bit of a back burner. And that's something already to keep in consideration when I open my remarks later on. And again, this comes in the face that we have a climate emergency. Like, of course, we have hot wars, but literally we have hot records when it comes to global temperature almost every month. There's kind of the running joke that every month is getting a new record when it comes to global temperature. So what was the hottest month of the year? Well, it's the last month. That's kind of how the joke runs. And similarly, of course, you all know temperatures in Pakistan have been an indication for that, for the relevance of this topic. On the second layer to all of this that I want to mention is that, well, climate change is dropping off in terms of global awareness to a certain degree. And second, climate activism on the other side is kind of alienating from mainstream politics as well. So these are some examples that we see again in Western countries where climate activists have taken the route of real confrontation instead of being part of the larger discourse. Because groups such as here, the last generation, arguing that they are the last generation, that they can change anything when it comes to climate change. And that is a much more confrontational approach that we have seen in the past. The Green Party in Germany and in many other countries in the world have been part of mainstream discourse to a certain degree for the last couple of years. But now we see climate activism, Extinction Rebellion, Last Generation, and others are taking a more confrontational route. I think many of you have seen that famous paintings have been spoiled by climate activists. Is the Brandenburg Gate in Germany that has also been spoiled by climate activists and the like. So we see a twofold problem that I want to initially set up, and that is climate change in terms of global relevance and global discourse. Global attention has been slowly dropping off, despite that it is more urgent than ever to tackle it. And second, that climate activism has taken a more radical approach and more confrontational, which in the end also might be a causal relevance when it comes to mainstream attention dropping off. So now you haven't heard anything about liberals because the liberal response to all of this is kind of standing at the sidelines. Liberalism hasn't been involved in debates about environmentalism and climate change for way too long. And that is not because liberalism doesn't have answers to it, but within this discourse of, like, for example, more radical confrontational approaches to the climate emergency, liberals have had a hard time to find their anchor points to come into that debate. I want to argue that this has reasons why liberals have been standing on the sidelines, and that is because the values of green liberalism are very hard to transpire into that discourse. So here are what I believe the three core values of green liberalism that is applicable not only to climate change but to various forms of environmentalism. So all of the remarks that I'm saying here in the beginning are broader than just climate change. They are a framework how liberals tend to think about environmental problems at large, including climate change, but not limited to climate change. So as it is the case with liberals, they have very fancy words, so I will just unpack them a little bit. And if there is some clarity missing, you can later on ask in the Q&A or just let me know in the chat. But here are the three core values that I believe are at the center of how liberals think about environmental issues. So the first one is liberal or green liberalism is fundamentally anthropocentric. And that means that it is centered around human beings. So environmental policies are done not because of some abstract value for nature, but because it serves human beings. And again, as you will see later on, this is very counterintuitive and sometimes in the narrative perceived as something that people tend to be skeptical about. But unlike most environmentalists who are ecocentric, so they believe that nature has a value in itself, liberalism, through its very strong commitment to the individual and human dignity, thinks that all sorts of protective measures and environmentalism are ultimately serving human beings. It's a very human rights centered approach, and that later on, when it comes to climate policies, has to come into consideration. All of liberal climate policy is centered around the human being and around human rights and human dignity. And again, you will see later on that this is to a certain degree counterintuitive and has a backlash towards liberals, because liberals don't make the ecocentric claims that nature has a value of being preserved by itself. But to speak it in the most blunt terms, nature serves a purpose for human beings. That's what liberals believe. Okay, and that has many implications how liberals perceive climate change policies, for example, because the forefront is the protection of human beings and human rights. Next one, green liberalism is fundamentally cornucopian. By cornucopian, and that will become clearer because I will expand on that a little bit later. Cornucopian means that it believes in growth, in optimism about the future, and technological progress. like hopefully you can imagine cornucopia just in front of you, filled with all the goodies that you might need to belong. But it's a anti-scarcity belief set, and again, this is the one I will expand on a little bit later. But liberals ultimately believe that economic growth, technological progress, and a belief in the better future is at the heart of environmental policies. And that sounds counterintuitive as well, and that's why I will expand on that a little bit later. Then lastly, the way liberals think about institutional arrangement is from a polycentric perspective. So instead of pick and choosing certain approaches to climate change, for example, command and control, local norms, market-based solutions, liberals tend to be pragmatic when it comes to the institutional arrangement that best serves their interests. So there is no bias towards, for example, a state command and control solution versus a market-based solution, but instead liberals believe in institutional competition. Especially for environmental problems, there should be institutional experimentation. So again, as you can see, all of these are highly counterintuitive, and that's why liberals have not been able to communicate their ideas properly in the discourse that wants easy solutions, clear-cut answers, and a narrative that sticks to like broad concepts that are not unpacked. For example, like saying that, oh, the nature matters in itself, that's a very nice sounding claim. But if you unpack it, it has many repercussions how these activists think about human beings. If you, for example, think that the world is not anthropocentric, but ecocentric, you take an implicit stance that human beings are the cancer to the earth, as environmentalists such as David Attenborough has said. And in my discussion with many environmentalists, I have found out exactly that most environmentalists believe that human beings are the cause to all of the Earth's problems right now. And this is not the liberal perspective. The liberal perspective is that nature serves human interests. That, for example, a resource is only a resource because human beings, through their ingenuity, transform it into a resource. Otherwise, it is just stuff. So there's no value in itself. Value itself is a human creation. So that makes it hopefully clear that all of these ideas that liberals have are extremely counterintuitive if you look at it from the current perspective of the discourse. Okay, if you present these ideas like this, human beings matter the most, we are happy about economic progress, and we don't have a clear-cut solution, whether it is the state, whether it is local governance, or whether it is market-based solution, then of course you see why liberals have not played a major role when it comes to the narrative. But what I will argue is that they have done so when it comes to the solutions. So I will give you just one example when it comes to this particular issue of economic growth versus environmental conservation, because a lot of people have exactly that intuition that economic growth and environmental conservation need to be balanced. So I have read much of the degrowth literature. I have exchanged with many people on the streets, and when they hear about green liberalism, they say always the same claim. Yeah, we can only have environmental conservation when we balance growth or actually degrowth. Okay, and that is one of the claims that I think liberals need to debunk the most. I will skip ahead here a little bit in terms of timing, that makes more sense. But I think the intuition that those people have, I have some charts here for you, make a lot of sense, right? In the past, so from this is chart from the 1900s to 1970, we see that GDP and resource usage has gone in parallel. So for example, the thicker line, the dark line that you see here is GDP, and all of the natural resources
Sorry,
basically
Sven,
go in.
we don't see the charts. Somehow the
Okay,
screen is
okay.
like,
Okay, let me see. Okay, I can just reshare then. So because I was skipping ahead, I suppose. So then you should see the chart here. So Here you can see the chart. As I said, GDP is growing, and at the same time, resource usage is growing in parallel, right? And that intuition that many people have is empirically robust, right? Like, okay, for each unit of GDP, we need to have each unit of natural resources or energy consumption, so therefore emissions to a certain degree, right? And that has been true until the 1970s. Also, interestingly, that was the time when a lot of environmental debates about the sustainability of economic growth and resource use or emissions have been taken place. Okay, so but what we have seen now over the last couple of years, and I have to skip ahead, although just note that all of these arguments that the environmental movement is making until today, they are not like new to the 2010s or 2020s. They've been around since the 70s, 80s, and 90s, with especially the Club of Rome pushing publications such as The Limits to Growth. But what is important to see is that this has been reversing. So this is a new chart. This is from the 1970s onwards. So like what you saw before is everything, left to the chart. We see here GDP growing, resource and emissions growing to a certain degree in parallel. But what you see after the 1970s after the 1970s is that we have economic growth, but at the same time, less resource use and less energy use. So what we have been doing is we are growing more from less, and not relatively. We are not using at the margin less resources. We use absolutely less resources. Okay, absolutely less resource. So we can have economic growth with absolutely less, not relatively, absolutely less resources. There's a great book on that with much more charts where I also take some of these materials from, which is Andrew McAfee's More from Less. I mean, you get why the title is called like that. I will just skip ahead a couple of things. You can see that this is robust in the data actually throughout. Was energy here, for example, with energy consumption and CO2 emissions. Similar phenomenon appears, at least in the Western world, where we have most data. And that is called the great decoupling that is going on since the 1970s. Okay, and the reason for this, I just again have to skip ahead a little bit, is it's not magic. It's the things that led to economic growth, property rights, market dynamics, technological progress, accountable government, and in general, a public consciousness. So this is not something that we unleashed in the last 50, 60 years that is rocket science. It is instead very basic liberal political economy, and liberals haven't been able to take pride in all of this because the narrative has been taken away from that. Let me close my little remarks with something that I would say are the liberal recommendations following from the three values that I unpacked earlier, that we have an anthropocentric worldview in comparison to an ecocentric worldview. And if that's not clear, I'm happy to answer that in the Q&A, because I think it's a crucial point philosophically, but I wanted to expand more on the public policy side of things. So on the three values, anthropocentrism, cornucopianism, and in the end, polycentrism, we have, I think, these interesting developments in the green liberal debate. And I think ultimately, even though in the narrative the liberals have struggled, this is what a lot of public policy makers are actually opting for. And the first, of course, is cheap and clean energy, such as, for example, nuclear power, that would boost all the economic growth that we need to get the technological progress to make progress on fields such as emission reduction. Okay, so cheap and clean energy should be at the forefront, maybe the most important goal for any policymaker right now. And that means to a certain degree that we don't that we also have to have things like nuclear power on the table. Next one that comes out of the anthropocentric worldview is adaptation boost. So we have to not be emotionally attached to certain emission goals, but instead have to make life work for people who live right now. People in the future, or nature in general, have no concept of human rights. There's no concept of human rights for people in the future or nature itself. Instead, we have to take care of people that live right now. Okay, and that is a core commitment of liberals. Therefore, boosting adaptation is still one of the forefront policies and often gets neglected, even though it is one of the core features of a human rights agenda. Migration policies, when it comes to climate justice, the West still emits and has historically emitted a lot of CO2 emissions. To rectify that, I have been in favor of more stringent, more open migration policies, and I think that could be part when we later on discuss climate justice. Emission trading schemes, that comes at no surprise. That is kind of creating a market mechanism for emissions. It's mimicking it. So another crucial part, and we need to roll that out on a regional, supranational, or I mean, hopefully international level, but for geopolitical reasons, probably not feasible. And lastly, institutional experimentation. Climate activists need to get away from the belief that the state has to control emissions trading or sustainability approaches. There needs to be experimentation on the local level, on the market-based level, as well as sometimes smart policy from a state actor. So these are kind of my recommendations and a couple of ideas on the framework that how liberals think about these issues. I hope that was not too quick, although I know it was too quick because I speak very quick, but nevertheless, I hope it was interesting and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Sven, for shedding light on these very unique yet very important values of green liberalism. And I think what you shared, that your explanation of anthropocentric value showed how we can prioritize human well-being while still caring for the environment. And then the cornucopian view gave us hope that innovation and technology can drive solutions to climate challenges while fostering both economic growth and environmental protection. And then finally, the idea of polycentric governance reminded us that tackling climate change requires cooperation at all levels, from local communities to global institutions. And I think very important takeaway for me is that we can grow more with absolutely less. So I think these values together offer a very balanced approach to sustainable development, making green liberalism not just an ideal, but a practical path forward. So now, before I move on, I would like to sum up some of the key points of Sven in Urdu for our Urdu listeners. स्वेन ने बात की ग्रीन लिबरलिज्म पे बिल्कुल एक नया पर्सपेक्टिव है, क्योंकि हम अभी तक क्लाइमेट एक्टिविज्म की जो है वॉइसेस वो ज्यादा देखते हैं, लेकिन स्वेन के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू के मुताबिक एक्टिविज्म जो है वो बहुत जगहों पर ऐसा नजर आया है जैसे बहुत रेडिकल और कन्फ्रंटेशनल हो गया है, और जहां पर ये कहा जाता है कि क्लाइमेट एक्टिविज्म जो है वो ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक है, मतलब ऑफ कोर्स वो ह्यूमन बीइंग्स के सर्वाइवल के लिए काम कर रहे हैं, लेकिन बहुत औकात ऐसा लगता है कि वो ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक होने से ज्यादा इको सेंट्रिक है और इकोलॉजी और इन्वायरमेंट को जो है वो प्रेफर कर रहा है इवन ह्यूमन बीइंग्स की वेलबींग के ऊपर। और यहाँ पे एक उन्होंने बड़ा अच्छा जो है वो पॉइंट दिया कि ग्रीन लिबरलिज्म इससे डिफरेंट सोचता है। ग्रीन लिबरलिज्म की उन्होंने 3 वैल्यूज जो हैं वो हमारे साथ शेयर की हैं, उनमें से एक एंथ्रोपोसेंट्रिक, जो कि टोटली ह्यूमन बीइंग सेंट्रिक अप्रोच है, जिसमें आप जो भी पॉलिसीज बनाते हैं, जो भी फ्रेमवर्क्स बनाते हैं, उसमें ह्यूमन बीइंग सबसे पहले है। उसमें यह है कि एनवायरनमेंट या नेचर जो है वो ह्यूमन बीइंग्स के लिए है, ना कि ह्यूमन बीइंग्स जो हैं वो एनवायरनमेंट के लिए हैं। इसी तरह से कॉर्नोकोपियन कॉन्सेप्ट के किस तरह से जो इसकी इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ है वो ग्रीन लिबरलिज्म में बहुत ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है, और उनके ख्याल के मुताबिक हम बिल्कुल इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ जो है उसको कंटिन्यू कर सकते हैं विदाउट यूजिंग मोर रिसोर्सेज। उसके लिए ज़रूरी नहीं है कि हम बहुत ज़्यादा एनवायरमेंटल रिसोर्सेज यूज़ कर रहे हो या बहुत ज़्यादा एनवायरमेंट को नुकसान पहुंचा रहे हो, और इस तरह के बहुत सारे ग्राफ्स उन्होंने ट्रेंड्स हमारे साथ शेयर किए। और इसी तरह से एक बहुत अच्छी बात जो मैंने भी शेयर किया कि मेरे लिए टेक अवे भी है कि ऐसा नहीं है कि बहुत ज़्यादा प्रोड्यूस करने के लिए हमें बहुत ज़्यादा जो है हमें उसमें इन्वेस्ट करना, बहुत ज़्यादा रिसोर्सेज चाहिए, बल्कि आहिस्ता आहिस्ता टेक्नोलॉजी के ज़रिए से हम ज़्यादा जो है वो प्रोड्यूस कर सकते हैं विद एब्सोल्युटली लेस रिसोर्सेज। सो ये अभी तक के स्वेन के जो हैं वो कुछ टेक अवेज थे। And now we move on to Miss Birgit Lamm, and we are very excited to hear from you, Miss Birgit, and we are very happy to have you with us. Thank you very much. Miss Birgit Lamm has been a key figure at the Friedrich Naumann Foundation since 1993, bringing a wealth of experience from various roles both in Germany and internationally. Notably, she has also served as the director of the International Academy for Leadership in Gummersbach, from 2006 to 2012, and as the head of the FNF Mexico office from 2013 to 2019. Currently, she is leading the FNF country office in Pakistan for the last 5 to 6 years, where she has been making significant contributions. She holds an MA in Applied Linguistics in English and Spanish from Mainz University and an MPA from the Hertie School of Governance, Berlin. Her work integrates liberal values with a strong focus on environmental and policy issues, reflecting her commitment to advancing sustainable and liberal approaches in addressing climate challenges. So, Ms. Lamm, now the floor is yours. We are eager to hear your thoughts and insights. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Saima, and also Sven, for actually pulling off this very meaningful workshop. And I just would like to continue where Sven said climate change has now become a back burner topic in the industrialized countries because people are more concerned with everyday of life topics. There are political crises going on, there's inflation, there's economic reshuffling or an economic crunch that makes people very much looking more into their livelihood, and climate change debates are actually going into the background of public debate. And you just said, yeah, in Pakistan, it's a crucial issue, and probably in Pakistan, it would be a topic which is very much at the forefront. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Pakistan is, and the United Nations have said so, it belongs to the 10 countries which will be most affected by climate change in the future. So it's a crucial survival question for Pakistan, but actually climate change is not really at the center stage of public debate. And I will be sharing and developing that a bit during my input as well. That also has a lot to do with the general, let's say, poly-crisis situation that the country is currently facing. But I think especially in these kind of critical situations, we would need to stress that actually the liberal solutions that focus on human decision-making and also benefiting humans actually hold a lot of potential and solutions specifically in a situation like this. So let me also share my presentation. Just a minute. So, no, sorry, it all worked it all worked nicely while we were in the rehearsal, and now there it should go. Yeah, so quickly so yeah, climate change or good governance issues. Actually in Pakistan, it's very much linked to both, and let me actually start with some of the issues that at least for Pakistanis are a bread and butter situation. My introductory thesis is actually that for Pakistan, the dangerous combination of having a demographic growth, which is currently the highest in South Asia. Last year's figures show that demographic growth is at 2.5%, and we're now having a population of approximately 200 and nearly 42 million people growing. That this is actually a very huge issue, specifically because you need to keep in mind that there are more and more people competing for limited resources, as opposed to some of the debates you have actually, for example, water supply or other natural resources are not declining. but through the changes of weather patterns like the monsoon, they are getting more irregular, but you have more and more people who need to use it. So apart from the demographic growth, you see the other social parameters. There's a literacy rate which is stagnant at around about 60%. And if we look at the Global Gender Gap report that the World Economic Forum is issuing every year, Pakistan, unfortunately, for years in a row, always finishes as the fourth or the fifth from the bottom. And actually, these factors also very much impact the climate change debate. Because awareness is very important, and if you have a literacy rate which is barely 60%, obviously awareness raising and analytical skills to actually tackle and understand the climate change issue properly is already an uphill task. And as we will later find out, actually climate change is also an issue that affects women and socially vulnerable groups disproportionately. And Pakistan, unfortunately, doesn't have a strong background in that. Sven already mentioned a general economic crunch over the world. That holds also true for Pakistan in a much, much more severe way as well. Pakistan struggles with a very difficult economic situation and is currently negotiating its 26th bailout with the IMF since the country's foundation in 1947. So that's a huge financial burden on public budgets, but obviously also for the overall economy. Sven also already mentioned the issue of inflation. That has been in Pakistan a huge issue over the last years already. Last year, inflation rates were up to nearly 30%. The latest figures are a bit more positive. Apparently, it's down to somewhat around 10%. But it hits specifically the lower and lower middle class segment, and even the upper middle class very badly. And obviously, that makes people much more focused on securing their daily livelihood, and they will rather focus on short-term survival and not really have a debate on long-term perspectives. Pakistan faces a poly-conflict or crisis situation. The economic situation is not good at the same time. Also, the political panorama is pretty unstable, and with the new Taliban government in Afghanistan, its western neighbor, we are also facing again a more critical security situation. So all these points do not really give space for a stringent public debate about climate change issues. But as I've said before, Pakistan is very vulnerable to climate change issues. And I would like to discuss some of these issues, specifically also on the example of the last big crisis, which was the big floods in 2022. So in spring 2022, as the Pakistani listeners or audience might remember, before we actually hit the flood, we were really suffering from an extreme heat wave. And then in early summer, starting in June, late June, an early onset of the monsoon with very heavy rainfalls in areas that were normally not affected. And since June, we had severe floodings in southern Punjab, interior Sindh, and in Balochistan. 2023 again saw a big heat wave urban floods, and in the northern areas in the Karakoram Mountains also an unprecedented glacier melt. And 24 is again has been a very hot year, and the monsoon patterns keep changing. So coming back to this horrible flood in 2022, actually the World Bank calculates its damages at around about 15 billion US dollars with a devastating economic loss, mainly on housing, agriculture, transport, and also communication infrastructure. Mainly the regional impact was in Sindh, but also Balochistan, southern Punjab, the rural areas. And the World Bank calculates that for reconstruction and mitigation, about 16 billion US dollar would be required. This is just to show you and remind you again of the impact. This major flood affected about 33 million people, and 8 million people got internally displaced. Most of them in the end migrated to the big urban areas in Pakistan, mainly the biggest metropolis in Pakistan, Karachi, and in this way also putting more pressure on the infrastructure, the need for water, waste production, or also jobs and economic activity in Karachi. The impact assessment is pretty dire, and this is also something we should need to keep in mind. Climate change issues are not as flashy, and they normally don't come as a big bang like a political crisis, a war. But the flood of 2022 actually increased the poverty rate from 3.7 to 4%, and it caused a major GDP loss, which is in a country like Pakistan, which has been struggling with its economic development for quite a while and was just coming out of the COVID situation. This was a severe blow. And as also UN or World Bank clearly state, and a lot of sociological research also shows, vulnerable groups and women are the most affected by these areas. However, relief and its mitigation has been bumpy. The Pakistani government has appealed to the international community, but also with the past experience from the earthquakes of 26 and the floods of 2010. Even as someone who lives here and has been living here since 2019, there was a growing mistrust of local and international donors or just ordinary people towards public management and relief work. When the UN made a call for first response aid, it was able only to receive or raise 11% out of the money it thought was necessary for first relief. And in January 2023, the UN and Pakistan hosted an international conference on climate resilience. The then Pakistani Minister for Climate Change, Sherry Rehman, was very active in pushing for it. And about 50% of the aid required was raised, but it was only 50%. And in the end, we have to be honest, it's EU 500 million, Germany contributed 185 million towards it. Actually, this money was not new money coming into the system, but in many cases, it was just a redirection of development funds that had been planned for development work in Pakistan already, and it was just redirected from its original purposes to fighting or mitigating the flood relief. And what was actually the reason for, let's say, this large-scale disaster that the flood had. There's a lot of discussion about the natural disaster that was going on, but if you really look into it, there's also a lot of, let's say, shortcoming in terms of public management. There was a late and insufficient reaction by local authorities, and although there had been emergencies before, and for example, the relevant government weather forecast had already predicted heavy and early monsoon rainfalls, but despite of the forecast, there were no contingency and emergency plans in place. So what were the lessons learned from past natural disasters like the floods in 2010 and an earthquake in 2006? So at least now Pakistan has introduced some documentation and forecasting. So this is at least already a good sign for the future. But still, if we look into the narrative, I would like to contrast here two statements which I think are very typical of the ongoing public debate, which, by the way, is mainly led and discussed on the international scale. So on the one hand, this is the prevalent one. You have people like the Secretary General of the UN saying that mainly the G20 countries are responsible for climate change. So they are responsible for helping developing countries. We would not deny the responsibility and the heavy footprint of the industrialized countries on CO2 emission, for example, but we should also not neglect the good governance and the local issues. And I would like to contrast it with a statement made by Blair Glencore's, who's the chairperson of Accountability Lab, who says the climate-related disaster is in reality also a problem that at its heart is a problem of corruption, not rainwater. And you see the list below: unauthorized construction, no regional planning, illegal changes in land use, land grabbing, deforestation in flood-prone areas, and large-scale exploitation of natural resources. So these are areas which are actually homegrown. And also, again, this is something that he doesn't mention. There's the exponential demographic development, which, for example, forces specifically poorer people who have no land titles to actually move into natural flooding areas, because the monsoon season has always produced floods around the river belts. So these people actually moved and now live in areas where there shouldn't be settlements because they are naturally contingency areas for rain floods. So the role of the media, you have the debate going on, or had the debate going on in international media, which focus on the natural catastrophes, but they never discuss the human angle, the good governance angle, the economic angle. And this is actually an issue where I would actually say that we liberals actually need to take a stance. First of all, in a country like Pakistan with a growing population, we need economic development because everybody needs to earn a living. And we also need to produce more and more food. We use more water. So actually, we have limited resources. And actually, we do have to produce more with limited or less resources. Obviously, people produce wastewaters. They produce residual waste as well. So actually the word of the day is also finding ways of how to price or incorporate environmental aspects into our business production industrial cycles. So we need innovation, we need new ways of doing business, and we also need more accountability in terms of good governance. We need to strengthen local responsibility as well, because environmental challenges always pop up on the local level as well. And we need to have also personal responsibility. I think there is not one big global issue where every individual can make such a difference in his own use of resources, and also the way how we go about consumption and about our own business decisions. And we are all, as consumers, as employees, or as entrepreneurs, we all engage in business cycles. And the idea is also we need to give a price to the consumption of environmental resources. For example, CPDI has, with our support, done studies on emitting CO2 carbon footprint by CO2 trade. We also talked about innovation with new energy-saving electric appliances, and we have different variations in that. And we also support new innovative business ideas that actually keep the environmental aspect within the business cycle. And I think this is actually something where every individual can make a huge difference. And this is like my personal essence. Being a liberal is like, it's personal responsibility for me. Don't blame it on the government or someone else doing it for you. Do your own bit towards it. And yeah, in that respect, this would be my take. I think for Pakistan, climate change in combination with a growing demographic youth bulge. I mean, having a young population is amazing because it means creativity and new plans of life. But it's the most dangerous, silent problem that Pakistan is facing for the future. And I think it can be more critical than any of the short-term political economic turmoils that we are having or facing right now and that we are discussing so much. And I would also say Pakistan needs to debate these climate change issues in public in an informed way much more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lamm, for this very insightful contribution. And you have emphasized a very crucial point in our discussion, that whether it is climate shocks or governance failures that actually pose a greater threat in the context of tackling climate change, especially in countries like Pakistan. So once again, to ensure everyone is on the same page, I will just quickly summarize Ms. Lamm's key points in Urdu. So Ms. Lamm ने अपनी डिस्कशन का आगाज इस बात से किया, पाकिस्तान के पॉलिटिकल कॉन्टेक्स्ट, उसके इकोनॉमिक कॉन्टेक्स्ट को एक्सप्लेन करते हुए कि किस पॉलिटिकल कॉन्टेक्स्ट के बीच में रहते हुए हम क्लाइमेट चेंज के प्रॉब्लम को फेस कर रहे हैं, और उसमें कौन सी और यकीनन पाकिस्तान जो है टॉप 10 वल्नरेबल कंट्रीज में से है, और पाकिस्तान की वल्नरेबिलिटी वो किन किन एस्पेक्ट्स में ज्यादा है। एग्जांपल के तौर पर उन्होंने 2022 के फ्लड्स को एक्सप्लेन करते हुए बताया कि जिसमें ना सिर्फ हमारा पावर्टी रेट इंक्रीज हुआ, हमारा जीडीपी लॉस एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर में जो है वो इंक्रीज हो गया, बल्कि इसमें वल्नरेबल ग्रुप्स खासतौर पे विमेन और चिल्ड्रन जो है वो ज्यादा इफेक्ट हुए। इसके रिस्पांस में हमारी गवर्नमेंट ने फंड्स जो हैं उनकी डिमांड भी की। मिस शहरी रहमान उस वक्त बड़ी एक्टिव हमारी फेडरल मिनिस्टर थी, और जिनेवा में 2023 में एक इसके ऊपर जो है वो कॉन्फ्रेंस पे पार्टिसिपेट किया गया, जिसमें के फंड्स मांगे भी के, अगरचे कि जो फंड्स अवेलेबल हुए वो उसका बहुत स्मॉल फ्रैक्शन थी जो कि एक्चुअली डिमांड किया गया था। लेकिन बात यह है कि जो फंड्स आते भी हैं, क्या वो कहीं पुअर गवर्नेंस और करप्शन की नज़र तो नहीं हो जाते हैं? फिर इसके अलावा बड़ा अच्छा जो मिस लम ने हमारे साथ शेयर किया, यूएन के सेक्रेटरी जनरल की एक स्टेटमेंट, जिसमें वो कहते हैं कि जो अमीर ममालिक हैं वो ही इसके लिए ज़्यादा रिस्पॉन्सिबल हैं। सो उनको जो है गरीब ममालिक जिनके इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ अभी इतनी नहीं हुई और वो ज़्यादा वल्नरेबल है इन टर्म्स ऑफ क्लाइमेट चेंज, तो उनकी हेल्प करनी चाहिए, जिसमें वो यकीनन कहती हैं कि मैं इसके साथ एग्री करती हूँ। लेकिन हमें उससे पहले गवर्नेंस के इश्यूज को जो है वो भी एड्रेस करने की ज़रूरत है, जिसमें कि अगर फंड्स आते भी हैं तो वो कहीं पुअर गवर्नेंस और करप्शन की नज़र हो जाते हैं। और लिबरल्स से डिमांड करते हुए उनकी एक डिमांड थी कि हाँ इन साउथ एशियन कंट्रीज को, ग्लोबल वेस्ट को ज़्यादा इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट की ज़रूरत है, और ऐसी इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट जिसमें हम ज़्यादा प्रोड्यूस कर सकें और कम रिसोर्सेज को यूज़ करते हुए, लेकिन साथ साथ हमारी एनवायरनमेंट प्रोटेक्शन भी हो, लेकिन यहाँ पे गवर्नमेंट लेवल के ऊपर अकाउंटेबिलिटी इंक्रीज हो और लोकल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी जो है उसको इंक्रीज किया जाए। वो इस बात पे एम्फसाइज करती हैं कि इंडिविजुअल पर्सनल लोकल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी का कोई सब्स्टिट्यूट नहीं है। हम और कोई गवर्नमेंट पे पहले जो है डिमांड करने से पहले या ग्लोबल लेवल के ऊपर डिमांड्स करने से पहले हमें अपनी लोकल लेवल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटीज़, हमें पर्सनल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटीज़ जो है उसको फुलफिल करने की ज़रूरत है, और गवर्नमेंट लेवल पे अकाउंटेबिलिटी को जो है वो इंक्रीज करने की ज़रूरत है। थैंक यू मिस लम। Now I would like to move on to our next speaker, Mr. Imran Khalid, a very leading climate voice from Pakistan. Imran is a climate and sustainability thought leader with over 20 years of wide-ranging experience in the academic, non-profit, governmental, and private sectors. Imran's work focuses on regions and communities most vulnerable to environmental degradation and climate change. In this capacity, he has been associated with the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF, the Sustainable Development Policy Institute, STPI, Great Lakes Research Consortium, New York, and the Planning Commission of Pakistan. He regularly contributes to print and television media. Imran is a Fulbright scholar who holds a PhD in environmental and natural resources policy from State University of New York. Thank you, Imran. We are very happy to have you with us. And now we look forward to your insights on how Pakistan can address these challenges, particularly with regard to the intersection of climate governance and local adaptation efforts. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Saima, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with colleagues discussing a very interesting topic. I'm going to request Ms. Arsab to kindly run my presentation because for some reason I can't share it through here. Thank you. So I'm just going to build on what's been discussed up till now, and I'm going to, talk about it from a perspective of social justice. So is our collective climate tragedy? Can we stay on the first slide, please? Is our collective climate tragedy a global social justice crisis? Now, this is something to think about not only for Pakistan, but across the world. So think about small island states, think about people in Europe who've been affected by the heat waves, people in North America who've been affected by forest fires, from the impact of hurricanes. We've been discussing governance issues and the impact of climate change in Pakistan vis-a-vis floods. But let's not forget that even in New Orleans in 2005, when Hurricane Katrina made landfall in the United States, it led to similar issues. So what the issues that we are trying to talk about today, be they governance related, be they in relation to the climate crisis, they are impacting all of us, and more so when it comes to those elements in our society, those human beings who are not well off, who are most affected when it comes to lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to safe drinking water. Think about Flint, Michigan, right? Not only in Pakistan is safe drinking water an issue, but it's also an issue in the global north. So what climate change is doing is exacerbating these current and ongoing scenarios. And most of them are definitely governance related, and I totally agree with Ms. Lamm in that. And I'll be speaking a bit more about how we can enhance our governance. But I also tend to agree with the Secretary General's statement that what we are seeing in countries such as Pakistan, small island states, in India, in Bangladesh, in Philippines, in Africa, in Southern America, vis-a-vis climate change, the genesis is in the global north. And that's and we're paying a major price for the development that's happened in the US, in Europe, and in the developed world at large. The lifestyles that people in those countries have access to right now, it can be said with some evidence that it's essentially based on the premise that we're going to do what's good for us in the short term, and if it impacts the ecology, if it impacts the human welfare in other parts of the world, we'll think about it later. Unfortunately, we in Pakistan are also following that path. So there's a global north and a global south, but in our own country, there's a global, a local north and a local south. Think about people who are living in Islamabad, who've got access to Centaurus Mall, who've got access to, a number of, who live in 3 garage homes, they are far off from places like Nasirabad and Balochistan that got affected by the floods. Yet the decisions that people in Islamabad make have an effect on the communities and ecology across this country. So this whole notion of social justice, it's a cross-cutting theme, in my opinion, across the world, and it needs to be put forward. And it needs to take center stage, regardless of your approach to problem solving, be it environmental liberalism, be it one that focuses primarily on ecology. We cannot forget, and I agree with Sven here, that we cannot forget the human element. Unfortunately, we've forgotten the human element. There was discussion, Sven, in the chat box that I saw, whereby we were discussing whether mitigation and adaptation can address this, and there was discussion as to how adaptation might be more in line with the human element. But I think here it's important to recognize that the emissions that continue to happen vis-a-vis mitigation or lack thereof are also impacting the human dimensions, perhaps more so, because as long as the emissions continue, primarily in the global north, but also now in countries such as China and India, and even in Pakistan to a certain extent, they will continue to have an impact on those elements in our society, those human beings who are the most vulnerable. And that's why Pakistan is, in a list of top 10 countries who are most affected by the impacts of climate change on a regular basis. It's not due to our geography or topography. It's due to how our society is made up and where the vulnerable segments of our society live. So if you're living in Islamabad, you might as well be living in Berlin or London, because you have the resources to counteract anything nature throws at you. But if you're living in far off areas away from the capitals, the provincial capitals, or the capital city here in Islamabad, then you'll be affected. I want to move on to the next slide, please, Nisar. Thank you. So there was the picture here you see. This is from 2005. It was it's from The Economist. the gentleman, the tall gentleman, let's call him the tall gentleman here, giving money to a poor, and I think this person might be from the global south, a person, maybe a farmer, for not cutting his forest, or not cutting the tree cover, and they're giving him money. But does it really contextualize what is happening around the world? Does it really speak to how decisions are made? Who is making those decisions? What kind of plants were these? If you're talking about palm oil, which is $1 billion industry, then perhaps that will be allowed. But if you're a small farmer, then it is frowned upon when it comes to tree cutting. If you're for the tar sands in Canada, which exploiting which continue to result in great amount of emissions, then it's okay. But if you can get people in developing countries to back off from impacting their local environment, then that needs to be addressed. So I think there is somewhat of a colonial hangover here as well. And we really need to rethink the way we talk about and approach the communities across the world who are most affected. We really need to go down to the ground level and try and understand them. Throwing money at a problem never works. We are hearing a lot more about carbon markets now. We're hearing about REDD+, but this is all about delaying the inevitable. And what is the inevitable? We have to reduce our emissions and get away from our reliance on fossil fuels. But what's happening in vis-a-vis this is that we want to continue on our path, while we'd like those communities and countries across the world who do not have the resources to eliminate their emissions, and that's a dilemma. There is this whole notion of green economy now, the Sustainable Development Goals and Millennium Development Goals. It needs a course correction. The sustainable development does have the element of human dimensions, the economy and the ecology, but to me, on a personal level, I think the focus globally has more been on growth and less on ecology, and even less on the human dimensions. So that's skewed, and hence there has been no progress when it comes to the MDGs or SDGs. Next slide, please. So climate change is ground zero for Pakistan. We run the gambit when it comes to the impacts, from heat waves to sea level rise to riverine floods. Our urban areas, our rural areas, they're all being affected. Next, please. Ms. Lamm has already talked about the impacts of the 2022 floods. Next, please. This is a picture of Meher and Dadu district in Sindh. These are the communities that I was talking about. When I say that they get impacted by climate change, it's exacerbated by their current scenario. Very poor situation when it comes to their the state of infrastructure, very poor conditions when it comes to their healthcare system, little access to safe drinking water, and come floods, it's all exacerbated, and it has a major impact on the communities that are already under a lot of stress. Next, please. Next. And what happens is they end up on these small islands, trying to live day by day, trying not to fall ill, trying not to be affected, because these are very conservative societies. There can be harassment. There are no toilet facilities here. I mean, where are you going to get your water from? Where are you going to go to the toilet? These are the individuals that the decision makers across the world need to account for, including here in Islamabad. Next, please. Next. So what happened when it came to the floods, it was very, very quick. It started to rain early August, but then it really picked up speed by the second week. Next, please. And look at these dark blue areas that got most affected. If you analyze the districts, the state of districts in Pakistan, there are about 150 of them, give or take a few. Majority of those that are very low on the indicators, human well-being indicators, lie in these areas. They lie in Balochistan, they lie in Sindh. And again, I'm hammering this point that if you are already vulnerable and you get affected by the climate crisis, then you're really down in the pits. It's going to be very difficult to recover from that. Next, please. Indus River flooded to such an extent that surrounding areas, looked like a large ocean with small islands in between. And that's this is something that even the Secretary General spoke to when he visited Pakistan and did a flyover. So yes, I'll be talking about governance issues, and governance issues are there, but when it comes to the climate crisis, it's quite real. It's the clouds truly burst when it comes to Sindh and Balochistan in 2022. Next, please. The floods that happened in 2010, they affected a lot of the areas that were affected then, but they also affected areas that are affected by the hill torrents and the rain that happens on the mountain ranges, and the waters come down and they affected people. A lot of this was due to the encroachment that Ms. Lamm has talked about. We just were not prepared. There were key recommendations from the 2010 floods that we did not account for, and yes, the climate change is there, but our governance issues really, put a spanner into the things. So there's a climate attribution study by the World Weather Attribution Initiative, and it talked about how the rainfall was 75% more intense due to the impacts of climate change. And if you look at the study, you'll find that in the beginning, they do talk about the science and how climate change impacted the floods, but that also delves deeply into the governance issues that we have. Next, please. So very quickly, I'm going to go over about 8 points. So when I was with WWF till recently, and we got together, we brought in civil society actors, and what we said was that let's develop something called the Climate Crisis Charter. It's something that Pakistan can take up and work towards in terms of addressing the climate-related issues, but also our governance-related issues, because they both go hand in hand. And the very first thing that we started off doing was advocating for loss and damage financing. Soon thereafter, Pakistan led the program, and now there is a loss and damage fund. However, the financing, when it comes to loss and damage, it's not there yet. And that's where we're going to look to the developed world, to the countries who are most responsible for their emissions, to come in and help out those vulnerable communities who are being affected by climate change, such as small island states, such as communities in Pakistan. And I think this really needs to happen, and happen quickly, because the way things are happening, transpiring, we need action more than just lip service. Over the past 30 years, we're nearing our 30th Conference of Parties. Emissions have continued to rise. The promise post Rio in 1992, that was to have a sustainable development paradigm come forth, that never materialized. We are on the path to growth even now, and it's the vulnerable who are being affected. So this is something for the global north to think about, the very first thing. not only in terms of climate finance, but also mitigation and helping with adaptation. Next slide, please. And now what does Pakistan need to do? Ms. Lamm has spoken to some of this, and I'll just add to and build upon what she talked about. So we need to address our institutional governance issues. We need effective communication and coordination amongst relevant agencies. The NDMAs, National Disaster Management Authority, the provincial authorities, the district commissioner's office, the police department, the army. This communication and coordination needs to happen much before a disaster strikes. It needs to be ongoing, and it needs to, most of all, account for the communities. It needs to bring them on board in terms of acknowledging and addressing capacity gaps. We don't have a local government system, and that can help develop the institutional capacities. Next, please. There has been a lot of discussion on the lack of a functional local government system in Pakistan, and we've been at it for a few decades. But I think that's a political issue. Giving power to the local governments, takes power away from those in Islamabad or in Lahore or in Karachi or Peshawar or Quetta. So this is what really needs to happen at the district and tehsil levels on the ground. We need to have a functional local government system. And once you have a functional local government system, we know that, it's the local communities that are first responders when the disaster strikes. So without this, we'll always be, rethinking and questioning our priorities and questioning the decisions that were made whenever a disaster hits. Next, please. We do not have an effective land use planning system in place. In some areas, we do have land use plans, in others, we do not. Here, we need to bring in, GIS specialists, for example, and get them talking to people on the ground and develop land use plans with the support of the communities, because that will allow for us to look at the encroachments in a holistic way and take care of them and address them. Because one of the main reasons why we saw, floodwaters rise was due to encroachments. Similarly, early warning systems need to be reviewed. This would require enhancing the capacity of the Pakistan Met Department, having the technology in place to monitor future hazards, and then getting this information to the communities, not in terms of that the river will rise by such and such feet, but really in terms of how it's going to impact them. It needs to happen in local languages. It needs to happen through avenues that people in communities use. So information is still being shared. It's just not being shared whereby people can use that information in an appropriate manner to address the risks that they face. Next, please. The word local keeps coming up because I really think that if you're going to be addressing our climate problems or any other public policy problems, it has to be at the local level. We do now have a national adaptation plan. However, I think it could have gone through a more comprehensive stakeholder engagement process. We still need subnational, district, and tehsil level adaptation plans, because without local level adaptation planning, we will not be able to address the risks, as I said earlier. Involve the community-based organizations, involve the local leadership. Next, please. We need to incorporate nature-based solutions. So if you remember the 2004 tsunami, areas that were surrounded by mangrove forests were well protected, and the tsunami could not impact those areas in a big manner, in a significant way. And that is because nature acts as a buffer. So nature and human dimensions go hand in hand. Yes, it's a resource for us, but in so many ways, not only in terms of our food security, our access to water, but also in terms of how nature can really protect us when it comes to the extreme weather events. And here what we're saying is that we need to develop our rivers in a way whereby their riparian nature is enhanced. We need to remove the degradation. We need to ensure that the rivers are allowed to run in a natural way that and flow in a natural manner, such that the encroachments are removed and the flooding that may happen is limited. Next, please. Focus on the communities, focus on the local, women, children, elderly. Next, please. And again, mainstream crisis response across local communities, develop insurance mechanisms, develop community engagement programs, see what the community's needs are. At this time, decisions are made here in Islamabad or in the provincial capitals, far away from the communities who are being impacted on the ground. And unless and until we start to engage the communities in a holistic manner, not just for a report, not just for checking off a tick box on the donors checklist, but in a truly holistic manner. I'll just stop here and look forward to the discussion. So essentially what I've tried to do here is to highlight what needs to happen at the global level, and then what needs to happen at the local level in order to address the risks that are emanating from the climate crisis. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Imran. Thank you very much for your very thought-provoking perspective on climate justice. And as you agreed with the UN Secretary General's point of view, that the greater responsibility that wealthier nations in the global West and North bear for global emissions. And then localizing this issue, as you pointed out, that how even within Pakistan, cities like Islamabad act as a global North, while less developed resource-poor areas, especially those severely impacted by the 2022 floods, reflect a global South. And likewise, as you also raised a very important point, and like a challenge to green liberalism, noting that its focus is more on growth sometimes, overlooking ecology and even the human beings. And then, as you also emphasized, that the global North should not only take mitigation measures, but maybe they should also help underdeveloped countries in adaptation efforts. So once again, I would like to summarize some of the key points of Mr. Imran in Urdu. थैंक यू इमरान साहब, जैसे आपने बहुत ही अच्छे तरीके से पाकिस्तान के जो क्लाइमेट लैंडस्केप को एक्सप्लेन किया कि कहाँ पर हमारी जो वल्नरेबिलिटी की सिचुएशंस हैं वो किस तरह से ग्लोबल नॉर्थ से कितनी डिफरेंट है, और किसी हद तक ग्लोबल नॉर्थ का जो लाइफस्टाइल है और वो किस तरह से वाकई रिस्पॉन्सिबल हैं ग्लोबल एमिशंस के लिए. और इसी तरह से जिस तरह से आपने बहुत अच्छे से इस चीज़ को भी एक्सप्लेन किया कि कहाँ पे हम लोगों को बहुत लोकल लेवल मिटिगेशन मेजर्स की ज़रूरत है, बिल्कुल. लेकिन ग्लोबल नॉर्थ जो है वो ग्लोबल एमिशंस के लिए रिस्पॉन्सिबल है. उनको ना सिर्फ मिटिगेशन मेजर्स लेने की ज़रूरत है, बल्कि अंडर डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज़ को अडेप्टेशन में हेल्प करने की भी ज़रूरत है. हाँ, बहुत हद तक हमारे नेशनल लेवल पॉलिसीज़ का जो ट्रिकल डाउन इफेक्ट है, जो लोकल लेवल पे होने की ज़रूरत है, उससे हम लोग बिल्कुल, उस पर कोई दो राय नहीं है. जिस तरह हमारा नेशनल अडेप्टेशन प्लान, जिस पे सिर्फ नेशनल लेवल नहीं बल्कि उसके सब नेशनल, प्रोविंशियल, डिस्ट्रिक्ट और इवन तहसील लेवल प्लान्स बनने की ज़रूरत है. क्योंकि जो असल अडेप्टेशन एफर्ट्स हैं या कम्युनिटी रेजिलियंस की सारे इनिशिएटिव्स हैं, वो कम्युनिटी लेवल पे लेने की ज़रूरत है. और गवर्नमेंट लेवल पे हाँ, हमें अर्ली वार्निंग सिस्टम को और ज़्यादा जो है वो उसको इससे बेहतर एनहेंस करने की ज़रूरत है. अर्ली वार्निंग सिस्टम मौजूद है, लेकिन मे भी उतना एफिशिएंट नहीं है, तो उसको और ज़्यादा एफिशिएंट बनाने की ज़रूरत है. रिस्क मैनेजमेंट और वल्नरेबिलिटी असेसमेंट को करने की ज़रूरत है, और हमारे नेचर बेस्ड सॉल्यूशंस जो हैं वो बहुत ज़्यादा इम्पॉर्टेंट हैं, और कहाँ पर नेचर और ह्यूमन वेल बीइंग जो है ये एक्चुअली साथ साथ चलती है। और ऐसा नहीं है कि हम कहीं पर एनवायरनमेंट प्रोटेक्शन को ह्यूमन बीइंग के प्रेफर कर रहे हैं या ह्यूमन बीइंग्स को प्रेफरेंस दे रहे हैं एनवायरनमेंट के ऊपर, बल्कि एक्चुअली ये दोनों मिल के एक दूसरे के लिए जो है वो प्रोटेक्शन का जो है वो सबब बनती हैं। सो थैंक यू वेरी मच Sven, Miss Lam and Imran. Miss Lam has already told me that she has to leave because she is supposed to attend another meetings. Thank you, Miss Lam. So floor is open for Sven and Imran, and thank you very much for sharing such thought-provoking insights today. Yes.
Saima, we have a
Sorry.
hand raised. Hand raised. Should I allow the mic?
Yeah.
Let me know.
Sure. Please,
Okay.
Ibrahim, please go ahead.
Mr. Watt, your mic is on. You can ask the question.
Okay, thank you so much for this great insightful discussion. So I have a question from Mr. Imran, that Mr. Imran, if you can tell us that how does urbanization in cities like Karachi and Lahore exacerbate the effects of climate change, and what measures can be taken? Because you very rightfully pointed out the local government system and all these issues should be tackled at the local government. So regarding urbanization, my question is to you. Thanks.
Should I answer this, or should we? Do you want to take a couple of more questions?
जी इमरान, मेरे ख्याल आप साथ साथ आंसर कर सकते हैं.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. I think the urban question is it's a very important one, especially for Pakistan, because that's where a lot of the growth is. I know Sven was talking about migration earlier as well. So Sven, even in Pakistan, there's a lot of migration taking place. Migration from our rural areas into our urban areas because of the lack of resources that I had just mentioned. Because of the conflicts on our borders, people are coming to communities in our urban areas. But our urban areas, again, due to the lack of an effective local government system, local planning, they have not been able to inculcate the masses in such a way whereby it's sustainable. So people are living in shanty towns. So when we get affected by a heat wave, it's the communities and people without access to energy who get most affected. There's a lack of shelter. There's a lack of green cover, and that leads to a significant amount of heat island effect due to the heat waves, and we've seen losses in our urban areas due to this. Similarly, the waterways that once used to pass through our urban areas have been encroached to such an extent that there's urban flooding happening. Now, some of this encroachment is legalized. It's happening because the government has supported initiatives, and in other cases, it's happening because of lax government oversight, in which individuals have gone on and paved some of the riverine area such that the natural flow of the waters has been limited. And so we saw this in flooding when it comes to E11 sector, a very posh sector in Islamabad, which was very surprising for everyone. But that primarily happened not due to climate change, but because of severe encroachment. The other thing, so we've talked about heat wave, we've talked about urban flooding. One thing that I wanted to highlight was air pollution that's impacting cities across Pakistan, and that's not a directly related to climate change, but because of the way we use energy and our reliance on fossil fuels, that's contributing to air pollution. high air pollution levels across the region, not only in Pakistan but in India as well. So that's also contributing to it. How do we start to begin to address this? Again, ensuring that our urban planning is in line with the needs of the 21st century, and then utilizing science. So how many of our hospitals are looking at the patients and seeing how, whether it's a health scare, uh, whether it's an environmental issue or it's there are natural causes that are to be blamed for this, and this kind of information is not there. We are essentially making our decisions in the dark. So we really need to ensure that our public policies account for the communities on the ground and how they're being impacted, be it via climate, be it through environmental degradation or any other area, and address it in that manner. We can go on and on, but I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have some more hand raised, and I am gonna go one by one.
Can I just add maybe one quick thing from
Yeah.
my side?
Yeah, sure. Please, Sven.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, the question of urbanization plays a crucial role, and it just highlights one thing that many of you have raised before. It's the issue of governance and technological progress. Let's look at the one thing that I have been directly affected with, and that is, for example, earthquakes. When I lived in Taiwan, I was exposed to several earthquakes. However, due to the progress in terms of architecture, in terms of like how urban planning is done in Taipei, I was not affected the way that I was in Gaziantep in Turkey recently, like 1.5 years ago. So these plays crucial roles, in cities, and proper urbanization with proper governance can alleviate many of the concerns that come in place here. So again, it comes back to a governance issue that we have highlighted many times, and developing technological progress, because that helps in the adaptation mode. So just to throw that in on a global context, I think people are always captured in their local context and are looking, oh my God, urbanization might be a trend that is accelerating that phenomenon. If we look at it from a global perspective, urbanization is one of the key levers that we have to make climate adaptation possible.
Thank you, Sven, for adding that global perspective. I'm gonna open the mic one by one for the hand raised people who have raised their hands. You can unmute yourself once I open your mic. Mr. Kamran, I'm gonna allow you to ask the question. Please unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, if you're not able to unmute, I'm gonna move to the next one. Akmal Malik, I'm gonna allow the mic to you. You can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hello, sir. Actually, my question was about the funds promised by the international community in terms of environmental funds for Pakistan. The question is that how much percentage of those funds have been received, and how effectively they have been used? And secondly, in your opinion, what are the major gaps in our climate action plans and policies? Thank you.
I guess I'll just take this very briefly. So the funds. So my understanding. So this is my understanding of the situation. We apologies. I'll just take this. So in terms of the finances, we did not receive a lot of new funding after the 2022 floods. A lot of the funding that was made available from other areas. So that amount, the amounts that were they were diverted. So they were already coming to Pakistan for a particular issue. They were just given to the country through another window. So new funding was not forthcoming, although we were looking for about $10 billion or more in financing the recovery post 2022 floods. And Ms. Lamm has talked about why there has been this donor fatigue. There are wars going on. We just had COVID, and so I don't think the scenario is such that if future extreme weather events happen or earthquakes happen, we will get a lot of funding from abroad. This is how just the situation is right now. Hence, it's very important to focus on the local issues and local responses. And we've just talked about that. So your second question, I think we've gone and talked a lot about what the gaps are. Thank you.
Akmal, have you asked your question?
Yes, sir, I've got it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna move forward. And Lena is next. Lena, you can unmute your mic. I have allowed the mic to you. You may ask the question, whoever speaker you want. Okay, I'm allowing mic to the next person.
Hi, can I ask my question?
Yeah, sure, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. This is the first time I'm learning about climate change from a liberal point of view. Also, this is very timely because I work for ECHD, it's a Ecumenical Commission for Human Development, which works primarily among Christian youth. And these days we are having season of creation. And one of our activities is about plastic removal from gardens and from riverbanks. So thank you so much for having me. Also, this is the first time I heard about a national adaptability plan. And to me, it sounds more like national action plan we have in Pakistan against terrorism. Both of them sound same. Both of them are taking nap, and they really need to be upgraded. The floods of 2022, they also reminded me of the pollution. I mean, Lahore was the most polluted city in the world in that year. But we have seen some change in Lahore. I mean, the first plastic road of Punjab is in Lahore, and we have also seen plastic benches in public parks. So, and also government is planning to introduce plastic currency. So I wanted to ask our speaker, is it a good idea to force our government to carry on with this plan of introducing plastic currency? Will it help in climate change struggles? Thank you very much.
Okay, I can go ahead. I mean, I would need to look into the actual proposal, but like, okay, so the political economy perspective says the following, and I think that's the liberal approach overall. If things are without pricing, there's no incentive to act, right? So that's why, for example, water issues arise because we don't have a global water market. And that might sound scary at first glance, that you think like, oh my God, there's a water market and people have to buy water and stuff like that. But without a price, you will get overusage of resources. And likewise, if you don't have a price, you don't incentivize to you take care of the scarcity of an issue. So when it comes to the issue of plastic and collecting plastic, I give you an example that is currently happening in the world markets, and that is that a French, I think, business has found ways to transform plastic into the polymers, and basically they have an enzyme that splits up the plastic so that it can be used for industrial other purposes. So they have kind of an incentive to get as much plastic waste as possible, and therefore probably will now start to incentivize people in the developing world, in the global south, to collect all those plastic waste and to use it then for their own purposes, because they can sell the product after it has gone through their production to to industry and other usages. So this is exactly what you want to look for. What I might be doubtful is that that there is like just random incentivization through the government funds. However, in Germany we have a system that operates like that, that you have if you use plastic bottles and whatnot, you have to return them to get the additional whatever it is, €1, let's say. And that has incentivized people to take care of recycling and to take care of the waste properly. So based on a German experience, I would actually say that this is a recommendable practice because it issues one thing that I didn't talk too much about, but it is of course public consciousness. Individual recycling plays, besides all the big lever policies that we might have when it comes to climate change and environmental policy, plays a crucial role in societies where you have recycling as a good practice and you incentivize it through public conscious measures. You have a lot more in additional benefits to all the other stuff that you are doing. Let's say you have a recycling plant, and just the public conscious and habits of individual recycling already helps them to boost the additional whatever it is 20% that they would need to make real impact. So again, this is an all interchangeable system, but I wanted to throw in, when it comes to like plastic recycling, actually great breakthroughs that we make in terms of technology and progress. If you want to look up the company I was talking about, it is Carbios. I can type it in the chat. A very interesting and promising company, and again shows the case of technological progress can solve many of the issues.
Okay, thank you, Sven. Filza, you may also ask question. I have unmute your mic. See if you are able to unmute your mic and ask question.
Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I have a question from Sven. So I was thinking that you are saying that this human-centric approach is like, we need to just accept it as such. But don't you think that has been the reason why we are having these problems in the first place? Like these past 2 centuries, and this approach that humans are the center stage of everything, and everything is sort of for us, has created this problem in the first place. And a more humble approach would be the ecological approach, that we are just a part of nature. And maybe because that mindset shift would be much more helpful in the way we are living. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fundamental philosophical question. I don't have skin in the game what people believe to be correct. If some people have the intuitions that nature has a value in itself and stuff like that, then I mean that's a valid position, right? It's called the ecocentric position, and it's part of the school that really informed a lot of climate activists. And I just worry that if you think that idea through, I can link to some resources of like where ecocentrism can lead through. It's much of the discussion, for example, how much human population is sustainable for the planet. So some ecocentrists claim that the ideal level of human population, where it doesn't interfere with what they value, aka nature, is 150 million people. If you now consider that we have whatever 6, 7, 8 billion people and more coming in the world, that means like mass genocide of people. I don't think that that's a position I would like to take. Hence, I side more with the intuition that a human-centered liberal approach might be something that caters to my moral intuitions. However, the problems, I think, of environmental degradation often are not rooted in the fact that human beings exist. It is that we didn't have governance solutions that deal with our relationship with the environment. For example, for the longest period of time, we have, for example, had externalities, like to speak in proper economics term, we had externalities without having them priced in. So we had emissions that any economist would tell you is an externality that needs to be priced into the calculation of the entrepreneur, having priceless, like without prices. And I think that led to the environmental degradation, not that it is human itself. So it's a governance element that we have overlooked maybe for the longest period of time. But now there's still some and there is still some progress to make. For example, when it comes to measures of like water and like how to price that in, how to deal with the externalities in that regard. So that's something that I would consider as crucial. Just last remark here is. I don't think we should consider, and again, this is my own position and the liberal position. I don't think human beings are cancer to the earth. It is very esoteric to kind of think about a natural, sustainable equilibrium that doesn't exist. Nature is constantly changing. There are predatory species, and human beings are not cancer to the earth. Human beings have protected themselves for nature throughout their life. Nature has been constantly attacking human beings since its very existence. If you think about viruses, if you think about the need for shelter of human beings, if you need for predatory species, for attacks from nature, like human beings, like nature is not something peaceful. That's what philosophers call the naturalistic fallacy. Nature is not good in itself. It's not something that we can that human beings should say, oh, we are disrupting a sort of equilibrium. That sounds too esoteric to me. Again, I will link to some resources to consider. I think the implications of an ecocentric worldview are horrendous and are not talked about enough.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So everyone who have raised their hands, they can unmute their mic and ask questions. Tanzil, you may also ask question.
May
I have allow you. Yes.
It's me, Salman Karim. Basically, I have a question from Sir Imran. I am from the south of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and in 2022, when we face a lot of issues regarding floods and that sort of things, climate change. So Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif visited our area, and he promised that I will do everything for the safety of your area and for the safety of your district. But unfortunately, he didn't did anything for us till now. Approximately, it has been from he's saying from 2 years. But now, 2 weeks ago, we also faced the same issue. And after that, the same village which have been totally destroyed by the flood, and now that beside that village, another village is totally destroyed by the flood before 2 weeks ago. So that's can you tell me, sir, that how can we ask from the higher authorities that if they allow the issued funds for us, they are blaming the upper authorities, and the upper authorities always blaming the local authorities. So how can we we can ask from those people, from the people who have authority to manage the disaster funds and the disaster things to to work for the safety of the people? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tanzil.
Yeah, I think this is a dilemma that's being faced across Pakistan. So first of all, yes, the Prime Minister is going to visit these areas and he'll make a statement regardless of the political party he's from. But remember, we are a devolved country. So after the 18th Amendment in 2010, decision making in the provinces is not the responsibility of the federal capital. So even though the Prime Minister might want to say something for political reasons or might want to do something, at the end of the day, it is the local government that is responsible for addressing the local level issues. Now, that's why I talked about having a proper local government system in place, because if you have a proper local government system in place, people, individuals who you've elected as the community, then you can hold them to account. At this time, we cannot hold individuals to account because lack of an effective because of lack of an effective local government system. So that means that individuals who come in, they're there for a short period of time. They might want to do something, but then they move on. This happens vis-a-vis the district coordination's office or the police administration's office. You need individuals who've been there for year on end and they're there addressing the needs of the communities. And unless and until that happens, we will continue to see the situation as you've described, whereby communities suffer. Even throwing funds at the problems that you've highlighted might not be enough to address the concerns, because the response is not holistic. So we really need to get to the root of the problem, what's happening, where the communities systems are, and how collaboration can be employed to address these issues. And that takes a long time. So even if the Prime Minister had come in and said, I'm going to put in $1 million to address your needs, do the villages have a plan in place to utilize that? Probably not. Hence, this need to really, have a grounds-up approach to our public policy problems.
Thank you so much, Imran. And I understand that many of the participants still have questions, but due to time constraints, we need to now wrap up the session. Thank you everyone for your very insightful questions, and a special thanks to our panelists for their thoughtful responses. And it has been very engaging and informative discussion. Thank you, Sven. Thank you, Imran. And with saying that, I would like to conclude today's webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us and contributing to this very important conversation. Stay safe, stay engaged, and let's continue working towards a greener and more sustainable future. Goodbye and have a wonderful evening ahead. Thank you very much.
Goodbye. Thank you for the invitation. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, Sven. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.